The United Kingdom this Thursday pledged beefed up air defences for Ukraine in a bid to help Kyiv stave off Russian attacks on its energy infrastructure. The British Defence Ministry said some $200 million would go towards a NATO scheme to buy US weaponry for Ukraine, while Sweden says it's also announcing its third package of purchases as part of the programme. The announcements came as NATO defence ministers met in Brussels to discuss ramping up their support.
What you see overall is a picture of Canada and Europe stepping up, spending billions more on defense, ramping up the defense industrial base, keeping Ukraine strong. So I think this is very important. We will take stock today and then chart out the course towards our summit in The Hague.
Well, for more on this story, we can bring in our international affairs editor, Kethevane Gorjestani. Kethevane, increasing support for Ukraine is clearly a priority for most NATO allies. But are there new concrete steps then that the alliance is taking to help Kyiv?
Well, as you said, there are two countries that have now pledged more money to this PURL, the Prioritized Ukraine Requirement List. And that is very important because this scheme was created in the summer. And of course, this is in the context of a sort of drying up of U.S. aid coming to Ukraine, because what Donald Trump has said is we're perfectly happy to send U.S. weapons to Ukraine. We just don't want to pay for it. So the more countries participate in the scheme, the more weapons can be bought to the United States to send to the Ukrainians. And that's really the goal there, is to sort of prevent the weapons that are arriving in Ukraine from drying up and finding new ways of getting them. So far, there are more than 20 NATO countries and 2 partner countries, Australia and New Zealand, who have made commitments to this PURL. And the U.S. ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, earlier today talked about possibly more countries announcing that they were joining the scheme, the program. Possibly Japan, for example. Now, Japan would be solely defensive and non-lethal elements to help Ukraine, but that could be very critical too. It could be things like radar systems, as well as body armor, which is something that the Ukrainians need. And what the NATO ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to NATO said also is that he was thanking those countries that had made contributions, commitments, but also he said other countries need to step up, those who are not stepping up yet. So I think a part of this meeting is also going to be putting a little pressure on those who haven't yet made those commitments.
All right, well, the other focus of this meeting is set to be Greenland, with NATO on Wednesday launching a new military effort called Arctic Sentry. What more do we know about this?
Well, look, this new military effort is aimed at really sort of improving security in the Arctic, but it's really more about an existent situation rather than a new military operation. What it is all these military exercises that have been taking place in the Arctic for the past years. They're still there, and at least for the short term, there's nothing very new that is likely to happen. Maybe beefing up a little bit of these exercises, maybe beefing up the number of troops that participate in these exercises. But what is said by NATO and by its Secretary General is that we will be bringing everything we do in the Arctic under one command. So it's sort of organizing all of the national exercises to bring them under the NATO umbrella. He said, in the face of Russia's increased military activity and China's growing interest in the high north, we need to do that. But really, this is as much about the threat from Russia, the threat from China in the Arctic, as it is about Donald Trump and what Emmanuel Macron recently called the Greenland moment. All of the NATO allies, especially the Europeans, remember Donald Trump's threats about Greenland. And this is, in a way, an answer to that, which is that experts say NATO, as it is perfectly capable of ensuring the security of the Arctic, of dealing with whatever the threat of Russia and China is. And by the way, they say that the threat from Russia and China, at least the way Donald Trump presents it, is pretty overblown. But this is more of a rebrand. The Europeans and NATO allies are trying to tell Donald Trump that they're doing more about Greenland so that he sort of backs off from his threats.